The sound
All right,
came first,
sweetheart,
a
I got
crack
you.
like thunder splitting the desert sky sharp enough to make every head in
So
Maggie's
glad to
roadside
see
diner
you.
turn toward the source. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of a man's open palm connecting with a young woman's face. Beth Sullivan hit the checkered linoleum floor hard, her prosthetic leg twisting awkwardly beneath her. The glass of water she'd been carrying exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces, scattering across the floor like frozen tears. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, stark red against her pale skin. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Beth had been born deaf, living in a world of silence her entire 26 years. But her eyes screamed everything her voice could not. The man standing over her adjusted his expensive suit jacket, a gesture so casual it might have followed brushing lint from his sleeve. Vance Merrick was 42 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and beach resorts, not from honest work under the Arizona sun. His shoes cost more than most people's monthly rent. Pathetic, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Who the hell hires a cripple to wait tables? His two associates laughed harsh, ugly sounds that echoed off the diner's vintage metal walls. Garrett, built like a linebacker gone to seed, leaned against the counter. Floyd, wiry and mean-eyed, blocked the door to the kitchen. Beth tried to push herself up, but her prosthetic leg wouldn't cooperate. Her hands shook as she reached for the pieces of broken glass, signing frantically in American Sign Language apologies that no one in the room could understand. No one except the 6 men who just walked through the door. The low rumble of Harley-Davidson engines still echoed in the parking lot, a dying thunder that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the diner. 6 motorcycles sat arranged in a perfect arc outside, chrome, glinting in the harsh afternoon sun like weapons on display. The bikers filled the doorway, leather-clad and road-worn, their shadows falling across the floor like dark omens. The man in front stood 6'2", his broad shoulders filling out a worn leather vest adorned with patches that told stories of 1,000 miles and 100 battles. Silver gray hair fell past his collar, and a beard the color of winter ash framed a face carved from hard experience. A scar ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw, an old wound that had healed crooked, giving him a perpetual look of controlled danger. His name was Colton Briggs, though most people called him by his road name, Ironhide, and he was 64 years old. Behind him stood 5 more men, each bearing the same insignia on their vests, a skull with wings, the symbol of the Hells Angels Arizona chapter. They weren't young men. The youngest among them was 52, the oldest besides Colton was 61. But age had not diminished them. It had refined them the way desert wind refines stone, stripping away everything soft, leaving only the hard truth beneath. Colton's eyes, pale blue, the color of winter sky, locked onto the scene before him. He took in every detail with the practiced efficiency of a man trained to assess threats in seconds. The girl on the floor, the blood, the broken glass, the 3 men in suits who didn't belong in a place like this. The expensive shoes now planted inches from the girl's outstretched hand. Something in Colton's chest tightened, a familiar pain, old and deep, like a wound that never quite healed. For just a moment, the girl on the floor wasn't Beth Sullivan. She was a different young person from a different time, someone he'd failed to protect when it mattered most. He pushed the memory down, locked it away in the place where he kept all his ghosts. "Maggie," Colton said, his voice low and rough like gravel under tires. "Looks like you got some trouble here." Maggie O'Brien emerged from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. At 72, she'd run this diner for 40 years, ever since her husband came back and used his savings to buy the place. He'd been dead 15 years now, buried in the Veterans Cemetery 20 miles south, but Maggie kept the diner running like he'd walked out the door just yesterday. "Colton," she said, relief flooding her voice. "These gentlemen were just—" "These gentlemen," Vance interrupted, turning to face the bikers with a smile that never reached his eyes. "We're just leaving, but first I think your establishment owes me an apology, and a new suit." He gestured to a small coffee stain on his sleeve. "This is Tom Ford, $3,000. Colton took a step forward. Just one, but it was enough to change the entire geometry of the room. "I think," he said quietly, "you better apologize to the girl you just hit." Vance's smile widened. "Or what, old man, you and your geriatric biker gang going to make me—" The diner went silent. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to sense the tension, the scratchy country tune fading to nothing. Colton didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked past Vance, his boots crunching on broken glass, and knelt beside Beth. His knees protested. 64 years of hard living had a way of catching up with a man, but he didn't let it show. Up close, he could see that Beth was trembling, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her right hand moved in rapid signs, words Colton recognized because he'd learned this language years ago for reasons that still haunted his dreams. Please, help me. Don't trust them. Colton's hands moved in response, slower, more deliberate. I understand you're safe now. Beth's eyes went wide. In a world where most people treated her like she was invisible, where her disability made her less than human in so many eyes, here was this grizzled biker, this intimidating stranger speaking her language. How she signed. Later, Colton replied, then out loud, can you stand? He helped her to her feet, steadying her when the prosthetic leg threatened to buckle. Around her neck, she wore a small silver pendant, a dog running free. Colton's breath caught. His son Sterling had worn an identical pendant, a gift from his best friend, who'd lost his hearing in a childhood accident. The coincidences in life, Colton thought, had a way of cutting deeper than any knife. Once Beth was steady, Colton turned back to Vance. The other 5 bikers had fanned out, not threatening, not advancing, just present, solid as mountains, impossible to ignore. Now, Colton said, his voice still quiet, still controlled, about that apology. Vance's composure cracked just slightly. He glanced at his 2 associates, then back at the bikers. He was a man used to getting his way, used to money and influence, smoothing every rough edge in his path. But money meant nothing here in this roadside diner in the middle of nowhere, with 6 hard men who looked like they'd forgotten how to be intimidated somewhere around 1975. You don't know who you're messing with, Vance said, his voice harder now, the polite veneer dropping away. I could buy this shithole diner and bulldoze it before sunset. I could make life very difficult for all of you. Son, said the biker standing to Colton's right, a massive man they called Tank, though his real name was Randall Griffin. We're all over 60. We got bad knees, worse backs, and most of us wake up 3 times a night to piss. Life's already difficult. A few of the other bikers chuckled low, rough sounds. Vance's face flushed red. You think this is funny? No, Colton said. I think you hit a young woman because she spilled some water. I think that makes you a coward and a bully. And I think you're going to apologize to her right now, or you're going to find out just how difficult life can get. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then Vance reached into his jacket. Every biker's hand moved simultaneously, not to weapons, not yet, but to ready positions. Men who'd learned to read violence in the fractional second before it arrived. But Vance pulled out a badge, not a gun. FBI, special agent, the real deal. I'm a federal agent, he said, his voice cold now, all pretense of civility gone. And you just threatened a federal officer. That's a felony. Colton studied the badge. It looked legitimate. The number was right, the seal perfect. But something about it felt wrong, the way meat smells wrong just before you realize it's spoiled. Federal agent who slaps waitresses, Colton said. Times sure have changed. She assaulted me first. Threw water on me. I was defending myself. Vance's smile returned sharp as a razor. And if you touch me, if any of you so much as breathe on me wrong, I'll have you all in federal prison before the sun sets. See how tough you feel when you're 70 years old dying in a cell. It was a bluff. Colton knew it was a bluff, but it was a good one backed by a badge that gave it just enough credibility to create doubt. Behind the counter, Maggie's face had gone pale. She'd lived through enough trouble to know when to back down. Colton, she said softly, maybe we should. It's fine, Maggie. Colton held up a hand. The gentleman is leaving. Aren't you? Vance straightened his jacket again, his smile victorious. That's right. We're leaving. But first, he turned to Beth, who'd shrunk back against the counter. I'll be seeing you again, sweetheart. And then, as if to prove he knew exactly what he was doing, Vance signed in ASL crude, simple signs, but unmistakable. Soon. Very soon. Beth's face went white. Colton caught at the signs, the girl's reaction. He also caught the way Vance's eyes lingered on Beth, assessing her like merchandise, like property to be acquired. Every instinct Colton had honed over 40 years screamed danger. But Vance was already walking toward the door, his 2 associates falling in behind him. At the threshold, he paused. Nice bikes, he said, glancing at the Harleys. Real classics. Be a shame if something happened to them. He pulled out a business card, tossed it on the nearest table. When you're ready to apologize, and you will be, you can reach me at that number. Then they were gone, climbing into a black Mercedes with tinted windows and vanity plates NMX 4782. The diner remained silent as the Mercedes pulled onto Route 66 and disappeared east, back toward Flagstaff. Colton picked up the business card. Embossed gold lettering, Vance Merrick, CEO, Vance Corp, Real Estate Holdings. Real estate, muttered Wade Patterson, a man they called Sledge, built like a fire hydrant with a beard. Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. Colton pocketed the card, then turned to Beth. She'd slid down the counter to the floor, hugging her knees, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. He knelt again, ignoring the protest from his knees, and signed, "Are you hurt? Do you need a doctor?" Beth shook her head. Then her hands moved fast and desperate. "They've been watching me. 3 days, different cars, but always them. I tried to tell the police, but they said I was paranoid." "I'm not crazy. I'm not. I believe you," Colton signed. "Did they say what they wanted?" Beth's hands trembled as she signed no. "But the way they look at me, like I'm not a person. Like I'm merchandise." Colton's jaw tightened. He'd seen that look before in places most Americans only knew from news reports. Desert outposts where human life was measured in dollars and cents, where women and children became commodities. He'd fought against that evil once in a war most people had forgotten. And he'd sworn when he came home that he'd never turn away from it again. "Colton," Maggie said, approaching cautiously, "what are you thinking?" What was he thinking? He was thinking about Sterling, his son who'd come home from Afghanistan broken and bleeding inside, who'd reached out for help in those final days and found only silence. He was thinking about all the times he'd turned away, all the times he'd said, "Not my problem," all the times he'd chosen the easy path. He was thinking that he was 64 years old with a bad back and worse memories living alone in a cabin because everyone he'd ever loved had either left or died. He was thinking that none of that mattered. "I'm thinking," Colton said slowly, rising to his feet, "that we're not leaving this girl alone." Been 48 hours earlier. The nightmare always started the same way. Desert sand stretching to infinity under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air shimmering with heat thick enough to choke on. The smell of burning rubber and diesel fuel mixed with something else, something copper and wrong. The Humvee was on its side, smoke pouring from the engine. Flames licked at the undercarriage, small at first, then growing, spreading, hungry. Inside, men were screaming. In the dream, Colton ran toward the vehicle, his boots sinking in sand that seemed determined to hold him back. He could see faces through the shattered windows. Johnson, Martinez, Collins, Henderson. Boys, really. None of them older than 25. He reached the Humvee. His hands found the door handle, burning hot even through his gloves. He pulled muscles, screaming, until the door came free with a shriek of tortured metal. He pulled Johnson out first, then Martinez. Collins crawled out on his own, his leg twisted wrong, but alive, thank God, alive. But Henderson was stuck pinned beneath the steering column. The flames were growing, spreading, and Henderson's eyes met Colton's through the smoke. "Don't leave me," Henderson said. "Please, Sarge, don't leave me." "I won't," Colton promised. "I won't, I swear." But the flames reached the fuel tank and the world turned white, and Henderson's screaming filled the universe. Colton jerked awake, gasping, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The bedroom of his cabin materialized slowly around him. Rough pine walls, a single window showing the pre-dawn darkness of the Arizona high desert, the digital clock reading 4:47 a.m. Henderson had died in 1991, 35 years ago. Kuwait, not Iraq. Operation Desert Storm, they'd called it. A war that lasted 6 weeks and ended in victory ticker tape parades and a grateful nation. But Henderson was still dead, and Colton still dreamed about him every third night like clockwork. He didn't try to go back to sleep. He never could after the dream. Instead, he swung his legs out of bed, feeling every one of his 64 years in the protest of his joints, and padded barefoot to the bathroom. The face in the mirror looked like a stranger wearing his skin. When had he gotten so old? The silver hair, the deep lines around his eyes, the scar running down his cheek, a gift from a bar fight in Albuquerque, 1998. He'd been young then, 40, full of piss and vinegar and bad decisions. Now he was just old. He splashed cold water on his face, then made his way to the kitchen. The cabin was small, one bedroom, one bath, a main room that served as kitchen, dining room, and living room all at once. Exactly big enough for one person with no intention of sharing his space. Through the window, he could see his Harley-Davidson Road King in the carport, a 2012 model black and chrome maintained with the kind of obsessive care most men reserve for their firstborn children. Beside it hung his riding gear, the leather vest with the Hells Angels patches, the boots, the gloves worn soft from 10,000 miles of road. On the wall above the couch, a shadow box held his military decorations. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, ribbons whose meanings most civilians wouldn't recognize, and a photograph, a unit photo from Kuwait, 20 young men in desert camouflage, squinting into the sun, every one of them certain they'd live forever. 6 of them hadn't made it home. Henderson, Williams, Kowalski. 3 others whose names Colton whispered to himself, sometimes afraid he might forget. Next to the shadow box, another photograph, more recent but still 8 years old. A young man in Marine Corps dress blues, his face so much like Colton's at that age it was almost painful to look at. Sterling Briggs, first lieutenant, 28 years old in the photo. 28 years old when he'd put his father's service pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The coroner had ruled it suicide. The Marine Corps had called it a tragedy. The VA had sent a form letter expressing their condolences and reminding Colton that counseling services were available for surviving family members. None of them had asked the question that kept Colton awake nights. Could I have stopped it? Sterling had called 3 times in the 2 weeks before he died. Colton had been busy, avoiding, running the way he'd been running since he came back from Kuwait. He'd meant to call back. He'd always meant to call back. But one day became 2, became a week, became the phone call from a Marine Corps chaplain whose voice was carefully neutral as he delivered the news that would shatter what remained of Colton's world. "I'm sorry, Mr. Briggs, your son is dead." Colton turned away from the photograph. Some mornings looking at Sterling's face was like looking directly at the sun. Beautiful and necessary, and absolutely unbearable. He made coffee strong and black as the way he'd learned to drink it in the Army when sugar and cream were luxuries you couldn't count on. While it brewed, he did what he did every morning, checked his Harley. Outside, the desert was beginning to lighten, the stars fading as the sun prepared to announce itself. This was Colton's favorite time of day, when the world was quiet and still, when he could pretend just for a moment that he was the only person left alive. The Harley was perfect as always. He'd rebuilt the engine himself last winter, spending 3 months in the coal garage, his hands cramped and aching, losing himself in the mechanical meditation of disassembly and reconstruction. Wade had called him crazy spending that kind of time on a bike that already ran fine. But Wade didn't understand. The bike wasn't the point. The work was the point. The focus. The way it filled his mind and left no room for memories, for regrets, for the faces of dead boys who trusted him to bring them home. Back inside, coffee poured and steaming, Colton settled into his routine. Breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, bacon. The same breakfast he'd eaten for 40 years. Then the ritual he never skipped, even though it hurt every single time. He cleaned his pistol. The Colt 1911 had been issued to him in 1989 when he'd first deployed. Technically, he should have turned it in when he mustered out. But the Army had a way of losing track of things in the chaos of demobilization, and somehow this particular sidearm had made its way home in Colton's duffel bag. He'd never fired it. Not since Kuwait. Not in 35 years. But every morning he field stripped. It cleaned every component, oiled the action, and reassembled it with the kind of muscle memory that transcended thought. It was ready. Always ready for what he couldn't say. But ready. His phone buzzed a text message. Wade. Chapter meeting. Noon. Garage. Mandatory. Colton sighed. He'd been trying to ease back from the Hells Angels lately, spending more time alone, less time on the road. The Brotherhood had been his anchor for 30 years, the only family he had left after Sterling died. But lately, the weight of all those relationships, all those expectations, felt like another burden he wasn't sure he could carry. Still, mandatory meant mandatory. You didn't say no to the chapter. He texted back, "I'll be there." The rest of the morning passed in solitude. Colton read a Western novel, Louis L'Amour, the same comfort food he'd been consuming since he was a teenager. He worked on a piece of wood he'd been carving, slowly shaping it into something. He wasn't sure what yet. The wood would tell him when it was ready. At 11:30, he dressed in his riding gear, strapped on his helmet, and fired up the Harley. The engine roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder, and for just a moment, Colton felt something close to peace. The road would do that to you, make you forget just for a little while all the reasons you hurt. The Hells Angels garage sat on the outskirts of Flagstaff, a low cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof and more bikes than most motorcycle dealerships. The Arizona chapter wasn't as large as some 30 members total compared to hundreds in California or Texas, but what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in loyalty. These were men who'd known each other for decades, who'd ridden together through divorces and deaths, through good times and catastrophically bad ones, who'd pulled each other out of ditches, literal and metaphorical, more times than anyone could count. When Colton pulled up, 5 bikes were already there. He recognized them all. Wade's custom chopper, Boone's stripped-down road machine, Hank's touring bike loaded with enough gadgets to launch a satellite, Clayton's vintage Sportster, and Randall's massive road glide. Inside the garage smelled like motor oil and old leather with an undertone of stale beer and tobacco. The men were gathered around a battered wooden table that had seen better days sometime during the Nixon administration. Wade Sledge Patterson looked up as Colton entered. At 58, Wade was built like his nickname suggested, short, stocky arms like tree trunks from 30 years of wrenching on bikes. His beard was mostly gray now, braided into two thick ropes that hung past his chest. "About time," Wade said, but there was no heat in it. "Thought you were going to make us start without you." "Wouldn't dream of it," Colton said, pulling up a chair. "What's this about a Toys for Tots?" said Boone Sullivan, Boone Reaper to those who knew him on the road. At 61, he was the oldest among them, a whipcord thin man with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. "Annual run's coming up, 2 weeks from Saturday. Toys for Tots." The Hells Angels had been supporting the program for decades despite their fearsome reputation. Something about the holidays brought out the softness these hard men usually kept buried deep. "We're thinking Phoenix to Tucson," Randall Tank Griffin said. He'd been a combat medic, came home in '73 with a Purple Heart and a morphine addiction he had finally kicked in 1985. Now he volunteered at the VA hospital, holding the hands of dying men who reminded him of the boys he couldn't save 40 years ago. "Hit all the children's hospitals along the way. Make a show of it." "Bikes and toys," Clayton Matchstick Reed added, grinning. At 52, he was the youngest of the group, which meant he got stuck with most of the grunt work. "Kids love it. Hell, half the nurses love it, too." "Count me in," Colton said. It was the answer he always gave. The Brotherhood asked, and he answered. Simple as that. "Good man," Wade said. "We're leaving Friday, day after tomorrow, taking the scenic route, stopping at that diner on Route 66. You know, the one, Maggie's place." Colton knew it. Maggie's roadside diner 40 miles south, right on the edge of nowhere. They stopped there every year on the Toys for Tots run. Maggie always fed them for half price and sent them off with homemade pie. 2 days, Colton confirmed. "I'll be ready." The meeting broke up shortly after, dissolving into the usual banter and bullshit that passed for conversation among men who'd known each other too long to bother with politeness. Colton was halfway to his bike when his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, paranoia, the habits of a lifetime spent watching for threats, made him pick up. Yeah, silence. Then breathing. Someone was on the line, but they weren't speaking. "Hello," Colton said. "Who is this?" More silence. Then just before he hung up, a voice, distorted, mechanical, like it was being filtered through a computer. "Colton Briggs, we know what you did in Kuwait. We know about Henderson. Stay out of things that don't concern you." The line went dead. Colton stood in the parking lot, the phone still pressed to his ear, his pulse pounding in his temples. Henderson. They'd said Henderson's name. How that name wasn't in any public record. The official report had redacted casualties, listing them only by serial number. Someone had access to classified military records. Someone knew exactly which ghost would hurt him most, and someone wanted him scared. Colton looked at his phone, memorizing the number, even though he knew it would be a burner, untraceable. Then he pulled up Wade's contact and typed a message. "Need you to run a license plate for me. NMX 4782, don't ask why." Wade's response came back 30 seconds later. "You got it, brother. Give me an hour." Colton pocketed the phone and mounted his Harley. The sun was high now, the desert heat beginning to build. In a few hours it would be over 100 degrees. But Colton barely felt it. He was thinking about Henderson burning alive in a Humvee 35 years ago. He was thinking about Sterling alone in a room with a gun and too much pain to carry. He was thinking about the voice on the phone and what it meant that someone was trying to scare him. And he was thinking about the road ahead and the diner where they'd stop in 2 days, and the feeling growing stronger by the minute that everything was about to change. Some men spent their whole lives running from destiny, but Colton Briggs had learned the hard way destiny always catches up. Always. The call came at 2 in the morning, 3 hours after Colton had finally fallen asleep. He grabbed the phone on the second ring, already awake, already alert. Years of military training had taught him to go from unconscious to combat ready in the space between heartbeats. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Colton, it's Wade." A pause. "You're not gonna like this." Colton sat up, swinging his legs out of bed. Through the window, the desert night was black as pitch stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. "Tell me." "That plate you wanted me to run. NMX 4782. It's registered to a shell corporation. Vance Corp Holdings. Took me some digging, but I found the man behind it." Wade's voice dropped. "Vance Merrick, real estate developer. Big money. Real big. But here's the thing, brother. I got a buddy who works casino security in Vegas. He ran the name through some databases he's not supposed to have access to. And FBI's been watching this guy for 18 months, suspected human trafficking, specifically targeting women with disabilities. Makes them disappear across the Mexican border. They think he's moved at least 20 women in the past 3 years. Colton's grip on the phone tightened. FBI's watching him, and he's still operating. Can't prove it. Guy's connected state senators, federal judges, half the police force in Phoenix on his payroll. Every time they get close evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. It's like he's untouchable. Nobody's untouchable. Colton, Wade said carefully, whatever you're thinking, don't. This ain't our fight. We're bikers, not vigilantes. We do the Toys for Tots run. We go home, we live our lives. That's it. Colton thought about Beth Sullivan trembling on the diner floor. Thought about the way Vance had looked at her like she was property. Thought about Sterling, who'd needed help and gotten silence. Thanks for the information, Wade. Colton, I mean it. Let the FBI handle. Colton hung up. He sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to his own breathing, feeling the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. Then he picked up the phone again and dialed a number he hadn't called in 6 years. It rang 4 times before a voice answered, sleep rough and irritated. Do you know what time it is? Dalton, Colton said, I need a favor. A long silence, then, Jesus Christ, Colton Briggs. I thought you were dead. Not yet. What do you want? Dalton Cross had been FBI for 30 years before he retired. He and Colton had served together in Desert Storm, had stayed friends through the decades that followed, had drifted apart after Sterling's death, when Colton stopped returning calls, stopped answering emails, stopped being someone you could count on. Vance Merrick, Colton said, tell me about him. Another silence longer this time. How the hell do you know that name? Is it true human trafficking? Colton, this is an active investigation. I can't. Is it true? He heard Dalton sigh, heard the creak of bed springs as the man sat up. Yeah, it's true. We've been trying to nail this son of a bitch for 2 years. But he's smart, real smart. Only goes after women nobody will miss. Homeless, addicts, women with disabilities whose families have already given up on them. They disappear and nobody looks for them. What's he do with them? Sells them? Mexico, Central America, sometimes as far as Southeast Asia. The disability angle is new. Apparently there's a market for that overseas. Makes me sick just saying it out loud. Colton's jaw tightened. Can you stop him? We're trying, but every time we get close, the case falls apart. Witnesses disappear or change their stories. Evidence gets contaminated. We think he's got people inside law enforcement, maybe even inside the Bureau. Until we can prove it, until we can build a case that'll stick, Dalton trailed off. Why are you asking me this? He tried to grab someone, a waitress, young woman, deaf prosthetic leg. Slapped her around in a diner yesterday. Shit. Dalton was fully awake now. Colton, listen to me. Do not get involved in this. Merrick is dangerous. He's got money, he's got connections, and he's got a body count. You go after him, you're going to end up dead or in prison. So I should just let him take her. You should call the local police, file a report, and let us do our jobs. Your job, Colton said quietly, has been trying and failing for 2 years. And what are you going to do, storm his compound with your biker buddies? You're 64 years old, Colton. You're not a soldier anymore. You're just a man with bad knees and worse judgment. Colton thought about that. Thought about being 64, about the way his back ached when he got out of bed, about the arthritis in his hands that made it hard to grip wrenches some mornings. Then he thought about Beth's face, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd signed, "Please help me," like she already knew nobody would. Thanks for the information, Dalton. Colton, don't you dare. He hung up again. Outside, the stars were beginning to fade. Dawn was coming, bringing with it the kind of heat that made the desert shimmer like a mirage. Colton stood dressed in the darkness and began to prepare. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. The garage opened at 6. Colton was there at 5:30, pulling tools from his workbench, checking equipment he hadn't touched in years. The others arrived one by one, Wade first, then Boone, then Hank and Clayton and Randall. They found Colton field stripping his 1911, each component laid out on an oil-stained cloth with military precision. Wade stopped in the doorway. Brother, what are you doing? Getting ready. For what? Colton looked up, meeting Wade's eyes. We leave for the Toys for Tots run today instead of tomorrow. We stop at Maggie's Diner, and we make sure that girl stays safe. Colton, Hank Morrison said carefully, Hank Bulldog had been a cop for 25 years before he retired, had seen enough domestic violence calls to know the look in Colton's eyes. This isn't our fight. Maybe not. Colton's hands moved with practiced efficiency reassembling the pistol. But I'm making it mine. Why? Clayton asked. What's this girl to you? Colton slid the magazine home with a metallic click. She reminds me of someone I failed, and I'm not failing again. The five men exchanged glances. They'd ridden with Colton for decades. They knew about Sterling, about the guilt that aided him like cancer, about the way he punished himself for sins real and imagined. All right, Wade said finally, we're in. You don't have to. We're in, Wade repeated. All of us. That's what brothers do. Boone nodded. Ride together, fight together. This could get ugly, Colton warned. Merrick's connected, rich, dangerous. We go up against him, we might not walk away clean. Randall smiled, a grim expression that had nothing to do with humor. Brother, I'm 60 years old. I got diabetes, high blood pressure, and knees that sound like Rice Krispies when I stand up. I ain't got that many good fights left in me. Might as well make this one count. And so it was decided. They rolled out at 7-6 Harleys in formation engines, rumbling like distant thunder. The desert morning was cool, would be hot by noon, but for now the ride was perfect. Clear skies, empty roads, nothing but asphalt and horizon. Colton led as he always did. Wade rode his right flank, Boone his left. The others formed a V behind them, a formation they'd practiced so many times it was instinct now, each man knowing exactly where he belonged. They reached Maggie's roadside diner at 8:15. The parking lot was empty except for Maggie's old pickup truck and a small Honda Civic that Colton assumed belonged to Beth. The diner itself looked like something from a postcard of an America that maybe never really existed, chrome and neon checkered floors visible through the wide windows, a sign that promised home cooking since 1986. Inside, Maggie was wiping down the counter. She looked up as the bikers entered, and her weathered face broke into a smile. Well, well, she said. You boys are early this year. Change of plans, Colton said. Beth working today? The smile faltered. She's in the back, hasn't said more than 2 words all morning. What happened yesterday really shook her up. Can I talk to her? Maggie studied him with eyes that had seen plenty of men make plenty of promises they couldn't keep. But whatever she saw in Colton's face must have satisfied her because she nodded. Let me get her. Beth emerged from the kitchen a minute later, moving carefully on her prosthetic leg. She'd covered the bruise on her face with makeup, but it was still visible, a shadow beneath the foundation. When she saw Colton, her eyes went wide. He signed, "Can we talk?" She nodded, led him to a booth in the corner, away from the others. Her hands moved quickly, nervously. You came back. Why? To help you. To keep you safe. Beth's hands trembled. You don't understand. They're not just thugs. That man yesterday, Vance, he's rich, powerful. He's been following me for days. Different cars, different times, but always watching. I went to the police and they laughed at me, said I was paranoid. You're not paranoid. He's a predator. And he's done this before. Beth's face went pale. What do you mean, other women? At least 20 that the FBI knows about. Women like you, vulnerable, easy to take. He sells them across the border. Her hands stopped moving. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Then, why me? Because you're perfect for what he does. Isolated, disabled, deaf. If you disappeared, who would notice? Who would look for you? The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. My brother died 4 years ago, car accident. He was the only family I had. Everyone else, they gave up on me a long time ago. Because I'm too much work, too much trouble. Colton reached across the table, took her hand. His signs were slower than hers, but clear. You're not alone anymore. We're going to protect you. Why, you don't even know me. No, but I had a son, Sterling. He needed help and I wasn't there. He died alone thinking nobody cared. I won't let that happen to you. Beth wiped her eyes. What can you do? He's FBI. He showed you his badge. The badge is real. The man is dirty, and we're going to prove it. How Colton smiled, a cold expression that Vance Merrick would have recognized. By making him come after you again. But this time, we'll be ready. Over the next hour, Colton laid out his plan. It was simple, maybe too simple, but simple plans were the ones that usually worked. Beth would continue her normal routine work at the diner, go home to her trailer at night. But she wouldn't be alone. The bikers would set up a rotation, watching her around the clock, hidden but present. When Merrick made his move, and Colton was certain they'd be there. This is insane, Maggie said when Colton explained it to her. You're using her as bait. I'm giving her protection the law won't provide, Colton corrected, and I'm making sure that when Merrick shows his hand, we have evidence. Witnesses, something that FBI can actually use. And if something goes wrong, Colton met her eyes. Nothing's going to go wrong. But even as he said it, he felt the familiar weight of promises he might not be able to keep. The first night passed quietly. Clayton and Hank took the first watch parking their bikes a quarter-mile from Beth's trailer and hiking in on foot. They reported nothing unusual, no cars, no movement, just the empty desert night. The second night was the same. On the third night, everything changed. Boone was on watch alone, perched on a ridge overlooking Beth's trailer with night vision binoculars. It was 2 in the morning, the desert cold enough that his breath misted in the air. He saw the vehicles coming from a mile away, 3 SUVs, no headlights, moving fast across the hardpan. They stopped 200 yards from the trailer, and men poured out. Boone counted 6 all dressed in black, all carrying weapons. He grabbed his radio. Contact. 6 hostiles armed, moving on the trailer. I need backup now. Colton was there in 8 minutes, the Harley screaming across the desert, Wade and Hank right behind him. But 8 minutes was a long time in a firefight. By the time they arrived, the trailer door had been kicked in. Gunfire echoed in the darkness, sharp cracks that split the night like breaking bones. Colton didn't think. He drew his 1911, the weight familiar, in his hand after all these years, and charged. The first man came around the corner of the trailer, and Colton shot him in the knee. The man went down screaming, his weapon clattering across the dirt. The second man got off a shot that whined past Colton's ear before Wade tackled him from behind, 300 pounds of biker and rage driving him into the ground. Inside the trailer, chaos. Furniture overturned, glass shattered, and Beth backed into a corner. Her hands over her head, 3 men advancing on her. Colton put 2 rounds into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and everyone froze. Federal agent, one of the men said, pulling out a badge. Drop your weapon, or I will shoot you. Colton didn't lower the gun. You're no more federal than I am. I'm warning you. You broke into this woman's home. You're attempting to kidnap her. That badge doesn't mean shit. The man's eyes flickered to his companions. Some signal passed between them, some decision made in the space of a heartbeat. They drew their weapons. What happened next took maybe 5 seconds, but felt like hours. Colton dove left as the first man fired the round, punching through the wall where his head had been. He returned fire twice center mass, the way he'd been trained 35 years ago. The man went down. The second man got off 3 shots, wild panic fire, that stitched across the trailer's aluminum walls. Hank came through the door like a battering ram and clotheslined him, the impact lifting the man off his feet. The third man grabbed Beth, used her as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. Back off, or I swear to God I'll kill her. Colton held up his free hand, the other keeping the 1911 pointed at the floor. Easy, nobody needs to die here. Drop the gun. Can't do that. I will kill her. No, Colton said quietly, you won't. And then Boone appeared in the doorway behind the man, moving silent as smoke, and brought the butt of his rifle down on the back of the man's skull. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Beth collapsed, sobbing. Colton holstered his weapon and went to her, wrapping her in his arms while she shook. Outside, sirens wailed, growing closer. Cops, Wade said from the doorway. We need to go. No. Colton shook his head. We stay. We tell the truth. All of it. Brother, you just shot 2 men. They're gonna arrest you. Probably, but if we run, we look guilty. And Beth needs us to be more than guilty-looking bikers. He looked down at the young woman in his arms, still trembling. We stay. Sheriff Burke arrived with 4 deputies, guns drawn, barking orders. They separated the bikers, cuffed them, read them their rights. The 3 men who'd attacked Beth were cuffed too, lined up against the side of a patrol car. Colton watched as one of them made a phone call. Watched as the man smiled. Help was coming. Merrick's help. And Colton realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that he'd just made everything worse. They spent the night in the county jail, all 6 of them crammed into a holding cell that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Nobody slept. Wade paced. Hank sat in the corner, head in his hands. Clayton and Randall played cards with a deck someone had left behind. Boone sat next to Colton on the narrow bench. You think she's okay? I don't know, Colton admitted. Maggie picked her up. She's safe for now. For now, Boone echoed. And when Merrick sends more men? Colton had no answer for that. Morning came with the sound of keys and locks. A deputy led them out one by one down a hallway that echoed with their footsteps into a small room where Dalton Cross was waiting. He looked older than Colton remembered. Grayer, tireder, the kind of tired that comes from fighting battles you can't win. You stupid son of a bitch, Dalton said without preamble. Do you have any idea what you've done? Saved a woman's life, Colton replied. You shot 2 federal agents. They weren't federal agents. They were kidnappers with fake badges. Tell that to the judge. Dalton threw a folder on the table. Those badges are real, Colton. Every one of them. FBI credentials properly issued, fully legitimate. The men you shot, Special Agents Garrett Morrison and Floyd Hendricks, both with 15 years of service, both currently on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into alleged misconduct. Colton felt the floor drop out from under him. That's impossible. Is it Merrick owns half the police force in this state? You think he doesn't have people in the FBI too? So what are you saying, where we should have let them take her? I'm saying you just assaulted federal law enforcement officers. I'm saying you're looking at 20 years in federal prison. All of you. Dalton leaned forward. I can help you. Maybe. But you have to back off. Let us handle this. Like you've been handling it for 2 years. Dalton's jaw tightened. We're close. I can feel it. 1 more month, maybe 2, and we'll have enough to bring charges that'll stick. And how many women disappear in 1 or 2 months? That's not your problem. Colton stood his chair, scraping against concrete. You're wrong. It is my problem because I made it my problem, and I'm not backing down. Then you're going to prison, all of you. So be it. For a long moment, the 2 old soldiers stared at each other across the table. Then Dalton sighed suddenly, looking every one of his 66 years. You always were the most stubborn bastard I ever met, he said. Fine, I'll do what I can. But Colton, if you keep pushing this, if you go after Merrick directly, I won't be able to protect you. I'm not asking you to. Dalton gathered up his folder. At the door he paused. Sterling would want you to back off. You know that, right? He'd want his father to live, not throw his life away on some vendetta. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but Colton didn't flinch. Sterling died because I wasn't there when he needed me. I'm not making that mistake again. Dalton left. An hour later, a lawyer showed up, expensive suit, shark eyes, the kind of attorney most people couldn't afford. He represented Vance Corp Holdings, he explained, and his client was willing to drop all charges if the bikers agreed to leave Arizona and never return. No, Colton said. The lawyer blinked. I'm sorry. Tell Merrick to come himself if he wants to threaten me. I don't negotiate with messengers. They were released on bail that afternoon. Maggie posted it, draining her savings account, refusing to hear any arguments about it. You were protecting that girl, she said. That's worth every penny I got. Outside the sheriff's office, Beth was waiting. When she saw Colton, she ran to him, threw her arms around him, buried her face in his chest. You came back, she signed against his shirt. Everyone always leaves, but you came back. Colton held her, this broken young woman who'd somehow become the center of everything, and made a promise he had no idea if he could keep. I'm not leaving, not until you're safe. That night they gathered at the garage. All 6 bikers plus Maggie and Beth. Colton spread a map across the workbench, marked with locations Wade had researched. Merrick has a warehouse, he said, pointing, 15 miles from the Mexican border. Remote, heavily guarded. The FBI thinks that's where he holds women before smuggling them across. You want to hit it, Wade said. It wasn't a question. I want to end this, permanently. That's suicide, Hank said. We don't know how many men he has. What kind of security? Could be 20 guards, could be 50. Probably closer to 20, Boone said. Everyone turned to look at him. He shrugged. I did some reconnaissance. 3 perimeter patrols, rotating shifts, estimated 6 men per shift, plus maybe 8 inside, call it 26 total. You scouted it, Colton asked. Someone had to. Wade laughed, a sound like rocks in a tumbler. Sneaky old bastard. We're all old, Randall pointed out. I got shot in the shoulder last night, and I can barely lift my arm. Clayton's got a concussion. Hank's got bruised ribs. We're not exactly in fighting shape. We don't need to be in fighting shape, Colton said. We just need to be smart, fast, and willing to do what's necessary. Which is what, exactly, Clayton asked. Colton looked around the circle of weathered faces, men he'd ridden with for decades, at men who'd become the only family he had left. We're going to rescue every woman in that warehouse. We're going to get evidence the FBI can't ignore. And we're going to make sure Vance Merrick never hurts anyone again. You mean kill him, Hank said flatly. I mean stop him, however necessary. The garage fell silent. Outside traffic hummed past on the highway, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that 6 old bikers were planning something that might be heroism or might be suicide, or might be both. I'm in, Wade said finally. Me too, from Boone. One by one they agreed. Even Randall, who could barely move his wounded arm. Even Clayton, who winced every time he turned his head. When Hank asked, Colton checked his watch. Merrick's going to move fast now. He knows we're on to him. He'll either disappear or escalate. He looked at Beth. How long before he comes for you again? Her hands moved slowly. Days, maybe hours. He won't stop until I'm gone or dead. Then we go tonight, Colton said. We hit the warehouse, we free whoever's there, and we end this. And if we fail, Wade asked. Colton thought about Henderson burning in a Humvee, thought about Sterling alone with a gun, thought about all the times he'd failed the people who needed him. Then at least we failed trying to do the right thing, he said. That's more than most people can say. They spent the afternoon preparing, weapons cleaned and loaded, bikes fueled and checked, routes planned and memorized. Boone drew maps from memory marking guard positions, entry points, likely locations for holding cells. At 6 o'clock, Colton called Dalton. I need you to promise me something, he said when the FBI agent answered. What? If something happens to me tonight, if I don't make it back, I need you to make sure Beth is safe. Get her into witness protection. New identity. New life. Whatever it takes. A long pause. Colton, what are you planning? Promise me. I promise. Now tell me what you're doing. Something I should have done 35 years ago, Colton said. Something I should have done for Sterling. I'm standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Don't do this. Please, let us handle it. You had your chance, Dalton. Now it's my turn. He hung up before Dalton could respond. At 7:30, as the sun began to set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple, 6 Harleys fired up their engines. The sound was thunder, was music, was a promise and a threat all at once. Beth stood in the doorway of the garage, tears streaming down her face. She signed, "Come back. Please come back." Colton signed back, "I will. I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make, but he made it anyway. They rode out in formation, 6 bikes against the dying light, heading south toward the border, toward the warehouse, toward whatever waited for them in the darkness. Colton led as he always did, but this time he wasn't just leading his brothers on another ride. He was leading them to war. And in wars he knew from bitter experience, good men died. He just hoped when the shooting was over and the dust settled that some good would have been accomplished. That Beth would be safe. That the women in that warehouse would see freedom. That his sacrifice, if it came to that, would mean something. The desert stretched ahead, empty and vast, and the bikes roared through it like thunder on wheels carrying 6 old warriors toward their last stand. The warehouse squatted in the desert like a predator, at rest, all concrete and corrugated steel, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Floodlights mounted on 30-foot poles turned night into artificial day, creating pools of harsh white light separated by lakes of shadow. Colton watched it through binoculars from a ridge a quarter-mile away, counting guards, timing patrol rotations, mapping the patterns of men who thought themselves safe in their routine. 3 perimeter teams, Boone whispered beside him. 6 minutes between rotations. Cameras on the corners, motion sensors on the fence. 2 guards at the main entrance. The rest inside. How many inside? At least 8, maybe more in the basement level. Colton lowered the binoculars. Beside him in the darkness, Wade, Hank, Clayton, and Randall waited in silence. Old men dressed in black, armed with weapons that felt both familiar and foreign after so many years of peace. This is still suicide, Hank said quietly. 6 of us against 20 plus. We're not soldiers anymore, Colton. We're grandpa age. Our reflexes aren't what they were. Our aim isn't what it was. Then we make up for it with experience, Colton replied. We've lived long enough to know how to survive. That counts for something. Does it? Wade asked. Or are we just 6 old men about to get killed for playing hero? Colton thought about that. Thought about Sterling, who'd needed a hero and gotten silence. Thought about Beth, who'd signed, "Please come back," with tears in her eyes. Thought about all the women locked in that warehouse waiting to be sold like livestock. Maybe we are just old men, he said, but we're old men who still remember what it means to stand up when everyone else sits down. That's got to count for something. The others said nothing, but they didn't leave. At midnight, they moved. Clayton went first, crawling through the darkness with wire cutters and a prayer. He'd been demolitions in the army back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and Reagan was president. His hands shook slightly as he worked age, arthritis, fear, all 3 probably. But the fence parted under his cutters like it was supposed to. They slipped through, one at a time, low and fast, using the shadows between floodlights. Colton's knees screamed in protest, but he ignored them. Pain was just information. You could choose what to do with information. The first guard never saw them coming. Boone moved like smoke, silent and inevitable, and the guard dropped without a sound. They dragged him into shadow, zip-tied his hands and feet, gagged him with the duct tape. One down, Wade breathed. 19 to go. They made it halfway to the main building before the alarm went off. Later, Colton would never know what triggered it. A camera they'd missed, a guard rotation they'd miscounted. Plain bad luck. It didn't matter. What mattered was the sudden wail of sirens, the floodlights suddenly blazing brighter, the sound of running feet and shouted orders. "Contact!" Hank yelled, and all hell broke loose. Muzzle flashes lit the night like lightning. Bullets whined and cracked through the air. Colton hit the ground behind a concrete barrier and returned fire, 3 controlled shots at shapes moving in the light. One went down, the others scattered. To his left, Wade was firing methodically, his face calm despite the chaos. To his right, Boone had found a position behind a shipping container and was picking off guards with the patience of a man who'd learned to shoot before most of these young thugs were born. Clayton lobbed a smoke grenade. It detonated with a hollow thump, spewing white smoke that billowed across the compound. Another grenade. Another cloud. "Move!" Colton shouted, and they advanced through the smoke weapons up every sense, screaming danger. A guard stumbled out of the white wall, coughing, his rifle hanging loose. Hank hit him with a right hook that had 60 years of living behind it. The man dropped like his strings were cut. The main door was steel-locked, probably reinforced. Randall stepped up with a breaching charge he'd assembled from instructions he'd found on YouTube. Fire in the hole. They fell back. The charge detonated with a sound like the world ending, and the door sagged inward, twisted metal and shattered concrete. Colton went through first because that's what leaders did, into a hallway lit by emergency lights that painted everything red. A guard appeared, fired wild. Colton shot him twice as center mass watched him fall. "Clear left," Wade called. "Clear right," from Boone. They moved deeper into the warehouse clearing rooms one by one. Storage, offices, a break room with half-finished coffee, and a television playing to an empty chair. Then they found the stairs going down. The basement level was different, colder, darker. The emergency lights down here were spaced farther apart, creating pools of shadow that could hide anything. The air smelled wrong, sweat and fear, and something chemical that Colton couldn't identify. "Jesus," Hank whispered. The hallway was lined with doors, heavy doors with small windows. Prison doors. Colton looked through the first window and his heart stopped. A woman stared back at him, young, maybe 20, Hispanic, bruised, terrified. Behind her, 2 more women huddled in the corner of a cell that was maybe 8 by 8, furnished with nothing but a bucket and 2 thin mattresses. "Open it," Colton said. Wade shot the lock. The door swung open. The women scrambled back away from these armed men who'd just blown their way in. Colton holstered his weapon, held up both hands. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to get you out. Entiende, understand?" The first woman stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. "How many others?" Colton asked. She held up both hands. Fingers spread. 10. They went down the hallway, shooting locks opening doors. Each cell held 2 or 3 women. Some were young, some were older, and all were terrified. And all bore the marks of violence, bruises, cuts, the hollow-eyed look of people who'd given up hope. One woman had only one arm. Another was in a wheelchair. A third wore leg braces and moved with difficulty. Merrick's preferred merchandise. Women the world had decided didn't matter. "Upstairs," Colton told them, his voice gentle despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. "Stay together. Stay quiet. We're getting you out." They were herding the last of the women toward the stairs when the lights went out. Emergency power died with a groan of failing generators, plunging the basement into absolute darkness. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then someone screamed. Flashlights clicked on Boone Hank Clayton. The beams cut through darkness, revealing frightened faces, concrete walls, and at the far end of the hallway, a door they hadn't noticed before. It opened. Vance Merrick stepped through, flanked by 4 men in tactical gear. He was smiling. "Well, well," he said, his voice echoing in the concrete space. "The geriatric rescue squad. I have to admit, I'm impressed you made it this far." Colton raised his pistol. "It's over, Merrick. FBI's on their way. You're done." "Am I?" Merrick's smile widened. "Here's the thing about being rich and connected, old man. The FBI won't get here for another 20 minutes. Plenty of time to clean up this mess. Plenty of time to make sure you and your biker buddies have a tragic accident." He gestured to his men. "Kill them, but keep the cripples alive. Their inventory." The tactical team raised their weapons, and Wade shot the overhead sprinkler system. Water exploded from broken pipes, a deluge that turned the hallway into chaos. Colton fired blind through the spray, saw one of Merrick's men go down. Boone grabbed two of the women, pulled them behind cover. Hank returned fire, his shots precise despite the water streaming into his eyes. In the confusion, Merrick ran. "Go!" Wade shouted to Colton. "We got this! Go get that son of a bitch!" Colton went. He chased Merrick through the basement, water sluicing across the floor, his boots slipping on wet concrete. The younger man was fast, but Colton had spent 40 years staying in shape for exactly this kind of moment. His lungs burned, his legs ached. He didn't care. Merrick burst through a door at the end of the hall. Colton followed, found himself in a storage room filled with plastic crates and metal shelving. No other exits. A dead end. Merrick stood in the center of the room, no longer smiling. He held a pistol in one hand and a cell phone in the other. "You should have taken the deal," he said. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." "Couldn't do that," Colton replied, his own weapon steady despite his racing heart. "I've walked away too many times in my life, not this time." "Noble. Stupid, but noble." Merrick glanced at his phone. "I just sent a text. 5 words. Activate contingency. Eliminate all witnesses." "What does that mean?" "It means the girl, Beth, the waitress. I've had men watching her since you left. By now they've broken into wherever she's hiding. By now she's dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Colton's vision tunneled, rage and grief and terrible certainty crashing over him. Beth, sweet broken Beth, who'd trusted him, who'd signed "Please come back," who'd called him father. "You're lying," Colton said, but his voice shook. "Am I? Check your phone. I'll wait." With his free hand, Colton pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from Maggie, 2 from Dalton, 1 text message just delivered. From an unknown number. A photo. Beth on the floor of Maggie's diner, blood pooling beneath her head. The phone slipped from Colton's fingers. "That's what happens," Merrick said softly, "when old men play hero. People die, the people you're trying to protect, the people you love. Everyone dies except you, and you get to live with that. How's that feel, Grandpa? How's it feel to fail again?" Something broke inside Colton. Some last restraint, some final piece of the civilized man he'd tried to be for 64 years. It shattered like glass, and what rose from the wreckage was the soldier he'd buried in the desert 35 years ago. The killer, the survivor, the man who'd pulled triggers and watched enemies fall and slept fine afterward, because in war you did what was necessary. He shot Merrick in the kneecap. The younger man screamed, dropped his phone, fired wild. His bullet went wide. Colton's second shot hit Merrick's shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed against the metal shelving, gasping his weapon, skittering across wet floor. Colton walked forward, his pistol never wavering. "You killed her. You killed a 26-year-old girl whose only crime was being vulnerable." "Business," Merrick gasped through gritted teeth. "Nothing personal." "Everything's personal." He stood over Merrick, looking down at this predator who'd destroyed so many lives, who'd turned human beings into merchandise, who'd killed a young woman, who'd reminded Colton so much of the son he'd lost. It would be so easy. One pull of the trigger. Justice delivered by a man who'd already killed tonight, who'd crossed lines he could never uncross. Sterling's voice in his memory. "Dad, you always told me the hardest thing is knowing when to pull this trigger and when to walk away." Colton lowered the gun. "You're not worth it," he said. "You're not worth becoming a murderer for." Behind him, footsteps. Colton turned to find Wade in the doorway, soaking wet blood running from a cut on his forehead. "Everyone accounted for," Wade said. "The women are safe. Guards are zip-tied. Hank's on the phone with the FBI. We won." He saw Merrick on the floor. "You gonna finish him?" "No," Colton said. "I'm going to let him rot in prison for the rest of his miserable life." "Colton," Wade said gently, "I saw the photo. She's dead. Because of me. Because I promised to keep her safe and I failed." Wade crossed the room, put a hand on Colton's shoulder. "Brother, you need to call Maggie." "Why, so she can confirm what I already know." "No, so she can tell you that Beth's alive." The words didn't make sense. Colton stared at Wade, trying to process, trying to understand. "The photo was fake," Wade explained. "Photoshopped. Dalton figured it out. Merrick sent it to break you, to make you give up. But Beth's fine. She's scared as hell, but she's alive." The room tilted. Colton grabbed the shelving for support, his legs suddenly weak. "She's alive. Alive and asking when you're coming back." Colton looked down at Merrick, who'd gone pale, who'd realized his last card had been a bluff that failed. "Guess you're not as smart as you thought," Colton said. FBI arrived 14 minutes later. Dalton in the lead, right there, yeah. He surveyed the scene, 6 old bikers, 14 rescued women, 2 dozen zip-tied guards, and Vance Merrick bleeding on a concrete floor, and shook his head. "You stupid, reckless, brave son of a bitch," he said to Colton. "You actually pulled it off." "We pulled it off," Colton corrected, gesturing to his brothers. "Couldn't have done it alone." "You shouldn't have done it at all. This was our job." "Yeah, well, you were taking too long," Dalton sighed. "You know I'm still going to have to arrest you, all of you. Breaking and entering, assault, discharging weapons. The list is pretty long." "Do what you have to do," Colton said. "But those women go free, tonight. Not in processing, not in some holding cell. They've been prisoners long enough. Already arranged. We've got translators and victim advocates on the way. They'll be taken care of." Dalton paused. "For what it's worth, you did good here. Real good. Even if you did it the stupidest way possible." Colton smiled. "I'm 64. Stupid is all I got left." The ride back to Flagstaff was quiet. They took it slow, exhausted, wounded, processing what they'd done and what it had cost. Clayton had a bullet graze across his ribs. Randall's shoulder was bleeding again. Wade had a concussion from where a guard had clubbed him. Hank had twisted his knee. Boone had burns on his hands from a hot barrel. They were a mess. A beaten, battered, bleeding mess. And they'd won. Dawn was breaking when they pulled into Maggie's parking lot. The diner was lit up like Christmas, every light blazing. Through the windows, Colton could see people moving around inside. Beth stood in the doorway. When she saw the bikes, she ran. Ran despite her prosthetic leg, ran despite the fear she must have felt all night, ran straight to Colton as he dismounted. He caught her as she threw herself into his arms, held her while she sobbed against his chest, her whole body shaking with relief and joy, and the kind of emotion that has no name. "I thought you were dead," he sighed when she finally pulled back enough to see his hands. "I saw a photo." "Fake," she signed back. "Dalton told me. Merrick tried to break you." "Almost worked." She looked up at him, this broken young woman who'd somehow put herself back together, who'd survived when the world had decided she didn't matter. "You came back. You promised and you came back." "I'll always come back," Colton signed in. "That's what fathers do." Beth's eyes widened. "Father, if you want, if that's okay with you." She didn't sign a response. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on like she'd never let go. Inside the diner, Maggie had prepared a feast. Eggs and bacon and pancakes and enough coffee to float a battleship. The 14 rescued women sat at tables and booths, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot chocolate, slowly starting to believe they were safe. Dalton showed up an hour later with paperwork. "Merrick's talking," he said, "giving up everyone. Police chiefs, border patrol agents, 3 state senators, and 2 federal judges. This thing goes deeper than we thought." "What about us?" Wade asked. "We still getting arrested." "Technically, you're persons of interest in an ongoing investigation. Don't leave the state." Dalton smiled. "But between you and me, I'm going to be real slow processing that paperwork. Real slow." 3 months later, Colton stood in a courtroom and listened to a judge sentence Vance Merrick to 47 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. The gallery was packed with rescued women, with families, with people whose lives had been touched by one man's evil. When it was over, when Merrick had been led away in chains, Beth took Colton's hand. "Justice," she signed. "Justice," he agreed, but justice he was learning was just the beginning. The real work was what came after. The healing, the rebuilding, the slow, painful process of learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that the world could be better than it was. 6 months after that, Colton stood in Maggie's diner and watched Beth work the counter. She moved with confidence now, her prosthetic leg no longer something to hide, but simply part of who she was. She laughed with customers. She signed with the deaf teenager who'd started working weekends. She belonged. Maggie had made her a partner in the business. 50% ownership, legal and official. "You earned it," the old woman had said. "And besides, I need someone to take over when these old bones finally give out." On the wall behind the counter hung a photograph. 6 bikers in leather vests standing in front of their Harleys, arms crossed, looking like they'd just ridden out of a legend. Beneath it, a plaque, "Our Guardians." Wade walked in, spotted Colton sitting in his usual booth. "Thought I'd find you here. Where else would I be?" "Good point." Wade slid into the opposite side. "Got news. Remember that organization we talked about, Angel's Guardian? After the trial, the bikers had established a nonprofit, protection and support for vulnerable women, shelters, job training, legal aid, and funded by donations and ironically by the assets seized from Merrick's criminal enterprise. What about it? Colton asked. We got 50 chapters in 20 states now. Hundreds of bikers signed up. Turns out there's a lot of old guys like us who want to make a difference. Wade grinned. We're going nationwide, brother. Colton thought about that. Thought about all the Beths out there, all the vulnerable people who needed someone to stand up for them. Thought about using the years he had left for something that mattered. Good, he said simply. Beth brought over coffee without being asked, set it down with a smile. She signed dinner tonight at my place. Over the past months, they'd settled into a routine. Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, the rhythms of family strange and new and precious beyond words. I'll be there, Colton signed back. Later that afternoon, Colton rode out to the veteran cemetery. He made this trip once a month, always alone, always at sunset when the desert light turned everything gold. Sterling's grave was simple. Name, rank, dates. Born 1992, died 2020, 28 years that had felt both too short and impossibly full. Colton knelt his old knees, protesting but obeying, and placed flowers on the stone. I did it, son, he said quietly. I stood up when it mattered. I saved someone who needed saving. I wish it could have been you. God, I wish it could have been you, but I think you'd be proud anyway. The desert wind picked up warm and gentle, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. I found a daughter, Colton continued, not to replace you. Nobody could replace you, but to give me a reason to keep going, to keep trying. She calls me Dad now, in sign language. Every time she does, it breaks my heart and puts it back together at the same time. He sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors that had no names. I'm 66 now, he said eventually. I don't know how many years I got left, but I'm going to use them right. I'm going to be the man you needed me to be, the man I should have been all along. He stood, his joints creaking, and placed one hand on the headstone. I love you, son. I'll always love you, and I'm sorry for not being there, for not understanding, for all the ways I failed you. The wind whispered through the cemetery, rustling flags and stirring the flowers left by other grieving families. But I'm here now, Colton said, and I'm not running anymore. He walked back to his Harley as the sun touched the horizon. The bike started with its familiar rumble, a sound that meant home and freedom and the open road. Colton rode slowly through the cemetery gates, then opened the throttle. The engine roared, the speedometer climbed, the desert blurred past in shades of gold and purple and deepening blue. He thought about the life he'd lived, the mistakes, the regrets, the people he'd lost and the people he'd saved, the wars he'd fought, both foreign and domestic, the long road that had led him here to this moment, still alive, despite everything, still fighting, despite all the reasons to quit. He thought about Beth waiting for him with dinner and stories about her day, about Wade and the boys planning their next ride, their next mission, about the women they'd rescued, scattered across the country, now rebuilding their lives one day at a time. He thought about Sterling and Henderson and all the ghosts that rode with him wherever he went. And he thought about the future stretching ahead like the highway, uncertain and challenging and full of possibility. The voiceover that had narrated his life, that old soldier's voice, rough with experience and regret, spoke one last time. They ask me what it means to be a hero. I tell them I'm no hero. Heroes don't fail as much as I have. Heroes don't carry as many regrets. But I've learned something in 66 years. Something worth knowing. It's not about never falling. It's about getting back up. Every single time. Even when you're tired. Even when you're old. Even when the smart thing would be to stay down. You get up. You stand. You fight for the people who can't fight for themselves. That's not heroism. That's just being human. Being the kind of human we're supposed to be. My son died thinking he was alone. But the girl I saved knows she's not. And that difference, that one life changed, that one person who gets to see tomorrow, because I stood up today, that's worth everything. The road ahead is long. My knees hurt. My back aches. I wake up 3 times a night to piss and I can't remember half of what I had for breakfast. But I'm still here, still riding, still fighting. And as long as I draw breath, as long as this old heart keeps beating, I'll keep standing up when others sit down. Because that's what we do. Those of us who've lived long enough to know better. Those of us who've seen what happens when good men do nothing. We stand, we fight, we protect. Not because we're young, not because we're strong, but because we're old enough to know what matters. And brave enough to risk everything for it. The road home is always the longest, but it's also always worth traveling. And sometimes on that road you find a new family, a new purpose, a reason to keep riding into the sunset toward whatever comes next. I'm not done yet. Not even close. The best part? Neither are you. Colton Briggs rode into the gathering darkness, the Harley's taillight glowing red against the night, heading home to a daughter who waited, and a life that finally, after so many years of searching, meant something. Behind him, the cemetery faded into shadow. Ahead, lights of Flagstaff glimmered like promises. And somewhere between the past and the future, between regret and redemption, an old biker found peace. Not perfect peace, not the kind without scars or pain, but the peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing when it mattered most, even when it cost everything. That was enough. That would always be enough.